Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for the American Express. It's an especially difficult week with 3 venues on the docket. There's going to be a 54-hole cut rather than a 36-hole cut. A lot of things changing, a lot of moving parts, and that's what this video is here for. We're going to go through all 3 venues and then at the end touch on the key stats for all 3 as a whole. I think if you get too specific, you try and kind of micromanage these golf courses, break it down into third pieces, you're probably going to do a little bit too much. Water down your analysis. We're going to summarize it all here and give you my top 3 to 5 stats to look out for to try and identify your top bets of the week and of course your outright picks as well. So all of this to try and simplify that process and get you started, get you thinking about the types of golfers you might want to consider for this week. So with that being said, a lot to talk about with these 3 courses. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. This year's field at the American Express is perhaps the best in tournament history. We have 10 of the top 20 in the official World Golf Rankings teeing it up, and also 5 of the top 10 players. You've got a Jon Rahm, Scottie Scheffler, Will Zalatoris, and that's just naming a few. An absolutely star-studded field, and a lot of those DFS sweethearts and darlings down there in the 8 and 9K range that are going to end up incredibly chalky this week. So I'm looking forward to it, whether it's from betting or from DFS. But the star of this show here is going to be the golf course, where we're going to touch on the PGA West Stadium course to begin. This is the quote-unquote main course for this week that players will be playing in 1 out of the 3 rounds before the cut. And then on Sunday, this will be the course where everyone is playing at the same time. This is the most difficult out of the 3 tracks. I would say a lot of that has to do with the Pete Dye design. He's the designer of the stadium course, as is the one over there at TPC Sawgrass, and both of them are infamous for giving you tricky angles off the tee. You have a lot of hazards that are strategically placed, whether they're water or sand bunkers, and then the greens tend to have a lot of undulation to them. So it plays a little bit more difficult than the other 2 tracks. Not so much from the ball striking perspective. There is, a few angles that are a little bit more difficult around this track, but more so from the greens. The greens are just a little bit harder to putt, and that's why the scoring average last year was just 1.43 shots under par. So that was a 70.57 average. The other 2 courses, the Nicklaus played right around 2.1 strokes under par, and La Quinta played even more significantly under. So we're going to go through those 2 courses briefly here in a second, but the one that we're going to focus on the most here is going to be the stadium course because it is the one in play for 2 out of the 4 rounds. A few things to consider. Past champions at this event in general include a Hudson Swafford, Siwoo Kim, Andrew Landry, Adam Long, and a Jon Rahm 5 years ago, and a huge wide variety of players. You have bombers like a Rahm, players that are a lot more accurate off the tee like an Adam Long, Andrew Landry, Siwoo Kim, who won last week, won here 2 years ago. He's an extremely aggressive player, whereas Hudson Swafford, who's now on the LIV Tour now, won here out of nowhere, and he's won here multiple times. Wasn't just last year, he also won, I believe, 7 years ago at the Amex. So you have a few course horses, right? A few of them on the field because they're in LIV now, and a wide variety of champions, which makes this an especially hard event to handicap. That's why in the beginning, I mentioned not trying to water down your analysis too much. A lot of people really try to get specific this week, and I was guilty of this when I first started my PGA DFS career, is making a model for all 3 courses, weighing the stadium course in 50% of that model, the other 2 courses in 25, thinking that I'm going to galaxy brain myself into an edge here, and all that ended up resulting in was me just overanalyzing. Paralysis by analysis is, a common term for the, sort of dilemma I was in there, and I really didn't get anything done. I was just relying on the numbers, which are great from week to week, but we know out there some of that fundamental analysis, whether it's looking at PGA, recent form, looking at course history, all of those sort of things matter. And at this sort of golf course, I think they matter even more. It's the tangible piece of evidence. It's the tangible piece of research that we're able to put into making our picks here. So we want to rely on that even more this week. But when we're considering the course, I think if we just take a look, holistically at the 3 courses as a whole, it's going to give us a little bit of a better chance of going out there and identifying our top plays. Because if we look at just tournament-wide trends over the 4 rounds and whatnot, there's a huge correlation between, 2, 3 of those key stats that we're going to look at and finishing position over the last 5 to 6 years. And from the comp course perspective, similarly, there's 2 or 3 courses on the PGA Tour that have a high correlation coefficient to what you see at this event in general. Not so much just to the stadium course, because all of those finishing positions are just being taken from the event in general. That's how a lot of that analysis is done, not from the shots gained perspective, which are only at the stadium course. So I think that a lot of that data is going to be useful, but let's go through the courses. Let's talk about the stadium course, which again will be in play for 2 rounds. It's a par 72, 7,187 yards. The scoring average was 1.43 under, and the cut last year, again, a 3-day cut, was 7 under par. So you had to shoot someone like 2.5 under par each day to go out there and make it to the weekend. The greens at the stadium course are tiny. They're much smaller than the PGA Tour average, but not the smallest greens that players are going to see this week at just 5,000 square foot. They are a Tiff-Dorf Bermuda grass that are overseeded with POA, and I really want to drive this home here. This part of the country has been extremely cold for the last week and a half. They've had that Arctic blast go through about 2.5 weeks ago. You had that the current Arctic blast that a lot of the nation is in. Even down here in Florida, we're feeling that coldness has made the area extremely cold. And anytime you have a Bermuda grass and it gets below 55 degrees, it's going to go dormant. So it is 100% dormant and has been over the last, I'd say, month and a half in the area. And given that temperatures are going to go down to 37, even 36 degrees in La Quinta over the next week and a half during the event overnight, you're going to see that Bermuda staying dormant. So it's overseeded with the POA, the greens over there at the stadium course, and that's going to be the main strain of grass that you see. But don't be completely fooled. Because it's a hybrid surface, because you have that Bermuda mixed in there, it's not going to play like that bumpy POA that you see over there on the West Coast swing, where players are complaining about it after the round. Historically at this event, you've seen players raving about the surfaces, saying that they are among the smoothest that you see on the PGA Tour. You see this effect over here for this event. You see it for a few of the swing events down there in Florida, like you see at Valspar Championship, you see the same sort of hybrid surface, where the Bermuda, it's only semi-dormant that time of year in Florida, but over here it's going to be completely dormant. So it's going to be extremely ideal greens. They're going to be flat as can be. They're going to have no imperfections to them. And over the years, you've seen a lot of putters really raise their game here. You've seen the field on average putt a lot better at the American Express, particularly at the stadium course, than the PGA Tour average. And a lot of that is reflected with your one putt percentage. The GIR percentage at the stadium course with those small greens was still 69.9% last year, which was a whole 1.7% higher than average. It was playing extremely receptive, so players were able to go out there and throw darts. So despite having a relatively small surface, players were still able to hit them. That's something to note there, particularly for the prop side. Fairways, they are a Tiff green Bermuda grass that are overseeded with a ryegrass. Much like the greens, a lot of that Bermuda is going to be dormant, so it's going to be a majority rye. They are 36.9 yards wide, that is, the fairways, which is a whole 2.2 yards wider than your tour average. And they were hit at a 60.7% clip last year in 2022, which was 5.7% lower than your PGA Tour average course. So greens hit a little bit more than usual. Your fairways hit a little bit less than usual. And a lot of that comes down to the rough, because even when you're missing fairways around the stadium course, it's not that much of an issue. There are overseeded and non-overseeded patches. The overseeded patches are going to have that lush green Bermuda grass look to it, but it's only 1 inch long. So because they're making it lusher, because it's going to have a lot more density to it, they're cutting it down to 1 inch, whereas the non-overseeded sections are just a Tiff green Bermuda grass. So they're not putting in any of that rye overseed, and those sections of the golf course are a full 2 inches long, which you would think would be difficult, right? 2-inch Bermuda grass sounds pretty difficult, except it's a dormant Bermuda grass. On TV, it's going to look brown. It's going to look crusty. It's going to look like all of the grass is dead. It's not. It's just dormant Bermuda grass. And the issue with that is that it's extremely dry. It's extremely whiskey. When you go and you hit out of it, it's like you're hitting off the fairway at that point. So despite it being 2 inches long, it's going to be shorter at a lot of spots on the golf course. It's going to be extremely easy to hit out of. that is reflected with the missed fairway penalty, which is just 0.26 shots. So you're looking at 0.11 shots less than the PGA Tour average, making it extremely easy to hit out of. In fact, I'd much rather be in that 2-inch dormant Bermuda grass than that 1-inch overseed. The overseed's a little bit thicker and a little bit more difficult to hit out of. So that's why you see, the fairway percentage a little bit lower than usual. A lot of players are just going to bang driver out there because the rough's not penal at all. And then your green and regulation percentage is higher than average because of how receptive those greens are. So that's really what keeps the course easy. The one real defense here are the greens. They don't run that fast. They run at like 11.5 on the stimp meter, so very average for the PGA Tour, but they have a ton of undulation to them. Pete Dye, we know he's a master architect. In fact, he's my favorite architect of all time. A lot of people think that he was unfair, made golf courses too difficult, and that's really what I'm about when it comes to your architecture. I want to see the best players in the world, particularly when it's meant for a tournament course like what you have here at the stadium course, to be difficult and test those players, particularly on and around the greens. So that's the one defense of this track. The second course in play is the Jack Nicklaus Tournament Course. It's on property at PGA West, a par 72 just like the stadium, and a little bit shorter at 7,147 yards. It's the second hardest out of the bunch. It plays to a similar level as the stadium course because it was designed by Jack Nicklaus to be a tournament PGA Tour level course. It has tricky greens. Now they're a little bit different than what you have at the stadium. The greens at the Nicklaus course are 7,000 square foot, a lot larger. They are a TIFF Eagle Bermuda with the POA overseed on them, so similar to what you get over there at the stadium course, the same sort of hybrid surface. The difference is, though they're larger, they're tiered greens. You see that at Nicklaus courses, a lot of times they have 2 or 3 tiers to them. So when you're missing the wrong portion of the green, it's almost like you're missing the green entirely. You have tricky up and downs from tier to tier. So that's why this course has difficulty to it. That's why it plays just about 2 strokes under. The reason why it plays slightly easier than what you see at the stadium course is its risk-reward aspect. There are a few par 5s where you can hit them over water hazards, have only about 180 yards into the green, but it's also bringing on a lot of risk. Hole number, I believe 15 or 16 on that course is that par 5 with the water around it. It's an island green for a par 5. So if that tells you how risk reward that course can be, you have a few dog legs you can cut off there if you're one of the longer drivers on tour. A few holes that might be a 3-wood wedge or could be just a driver putter for a few of the longer players on tour with some of those carry distances. It's a course where you could take it to something like 8-9 under par. You've seen that a few times at the Nicklaus course, or you could shoot well over par, completely eject yourself from this event. So it's an important round. The fairways are also a TIFF green Bermuda with an overseed of rye this time, so rather than the POA, and they're about an average width, right around 37 yards wide, so similar to what you see at the stadium course. The rough is a Foreman Bermuda grass. It's a 2-inch Bermuda, so you don't have that overseed, which means all of the rough around the Nicklaus course is going to have that burnout look to it, as opposed to what you see at La Quinta, which we're going to talk about here in a second, which is Bermuda grass, but it's not really all that dormant. They keep it a little bit cooler. They have the sub-airs over there. But over here at the Nicklaus course, a very similar look to what you have at the stadium, similar tricky greens. It has the same sort of idea in mind to be a PGA Tour level course, and the scoring is a little bit volatile because of that, as you also see over there at the stadium course. La Quinta Country Club, the last course, is where you're going to see your fireworks. This is where you can take it to 11, 12 under par. I mean, I believe Phil Mickelson shot a 60 at this track, which is 12 under in 2019, not even all that long ago. And it's a par 70, 7,000 and just 60 yards. So by far the shortest of the 3 tracks. And for Showdown, this is where you want to be targeting all of your players. You have at least 4 drivable par 4s, and there could be more for some of the longer players on tour. Hole number 18 is only 290 yards. It is surrounded by water, so there's a lot of risk reward involved with this course, much like the Nicklaus tournament course. But you also have super easy to reach par 5s. I mean, 490 yards, one of them's only 505 yards. So kind of similar to what you saw last week with the super easy par 5 9th and 11th at the Sony Open. You get a similar effect here for the American Express. So this track, unlike the other 2 courses, was not designed to be a tournament course. It's a country club meant for me and you to go out there, have a solid round. We're not driving at 290 through the air, right? We're laying up on that par 4 18th, taking something like a wedge into it and still having a relatively solid round. These tour players, though, with their horsepower, can go out there and take this place nuclear. Like I said, you've had a few, almost sub 60 rounds at this par 72 setup. So you're going to find a lot of ceiling performances around La Quinta Country Club, and you're also going to see a well under par average. Last year, it was well under 2 under. Sometimes it'll be 3.5 under par around La Quinta Country Club, making it one of the more important rounds because you have to take it low here, but a little bit of a low stress round. You're not going to see blow up rounds around La Quinta unless somebody is just completely hemorrhaging it when it comes to their ball striking. You're going to see a lot of guys taking it to 6, 7, perhaps even 9 or 10 under par, like I mentioned. The greens are a Poa Trivialis / perennial rye seed overseed, so a different surface here. It tends to be a little bit greener around La Quinta as compared to the Stadium or Nicklaus course. They're doing it a little bit more for the aesthetic purposes, right? They want it to look like a beautiful country club for those members, not so much for the utility of the course, right? They want it to be an easy, welcoming golf course. The Stadium and the Nicklaus course play a little bit firmer and faster and have those little chip off areas around the green to make it play a little bit more difficult. The expense there is the aesthetics of it. The beauty aspect when it comes to the courses doesn't quite look as beautiful as a La Quinta. The fairways are a Bermuda around that track. They're going to be extremely green compared to the other two courses. Very similar width at that golf course. You're going to see a lot of missed fairways, but it's a common Bermuda around La Quinta. So it's going to look a little bit juicier, but it's actually going to play it to a lower missed fairway penalty than what you're going to see at the other golf courses. The one real issue at La Quinta is there are trees. So unlike the Jack Nicklaus course and then the Stadium course where there's no trees to worry about at all, at La Quinta there's a few of them out there. Because you're in a residential neighborhood, there's a lot of trees that were planted out there for aesthetic purposes, which can actually cause you troubles if you're driving it offline. But if you're driving it well around La Quinta, you're looking at shooting just a ridiculously low score. All right, now that we've gone through the 3 courses, what sort of key metrics am I using to identify my top plays? So like I said before, we're going to combine the 3 courses. Just think of them as a whole package, a combo deal here. And at number 1, we've got shots gained approach. That's your key fundamental piece of analysis that you're going to be using every single week. And here at the American Express, it's no different. The players that are striping it the best, giving themselves the best opportunities, are going to have the best chance to take it to a 25 to 30 under par, which is necessary to win this event. Siwoo Kim won this at 28 under. Last year, it was a little bit of a lower winning score. Conditions weren't quite as conducive to going low, but you're still looking at having to set up those opportunities. I think using opportunities gained is another key metric that you can use to identify some of these top plays, but that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And number 2, they've got birdie or better percentage. All 3 of these courses are scoreable, but especially La Quinta, Jack Nicklaus course, that course, if you're aggressive, you can take to something like 8, 9 under par. That's where you're going to win this event. Around the Stadium course, you've got to shoot something like 4 or 5 under par to gain strokes to the field. The eventual winner will be able to do so, but what I'm a little bit more worried about is getting into contention, right? Over those first 3 days, being able to make a cut line that's 7, 8 under par. You need somebody that can go out there and nuke a golf course one of those 3 days. So birdie or better percentage, not only important from that aspect, but also from the fantasy scoring side, where of course a lot of these picks are meant to be on Draftkings for DFS, where you are rewarded heavily for going out there and being aggressive, putting up a lot of birdie production. And of course, we're trying to get to a winning position, right? Winning a golf tournament, you need that ceiling performance. And these high birdie or better percentage players have not only done well in terms of their fantasy production at the American Express, which no duh, right? The higher birdie percentage players are going to play well, but they've also performed a lot better when it comes to finishing position. So a highly correlated stat, any week, especially on the fantasy side, but particularly at a course where you're looking at low scores. And at number 3, you've got shots gained off the tee. Now, I was going back and forth about whether to use putting here or off the tee play, but when you look at last year's leaderboard, particularly on the shots gained perspective, almost all of the top finishers, and again, only shots gained are coming in for the Stadium course, so you have to take this with a grain of salt. All of the guys at the Stadium course were getting it done with the ball striking. Their putting stats, I believe of the top 25 finishers, only 4 of them had gained over 0.7 shots with the putting over their 2 rounds. And then the rest of them were either losers on the greens or just very slight gainers, like a John Rahm. Of top finishers like a Hudson Swafford were one of the few players that gained a bunch of strokes on the greens. That just comes down to variance because Hudson Swafford, as we very well know, not one of the better players on tour. So I'm not going to focus on the putting, right? At the Stadium course where they're playing for 2 of the 4 rounds, it's not that correlated to success. In fact, it's the least correlated stat relatively across the field. What I'm worried about is off the tee play, because we mentioned that at the freaking Quinta course, you can drive 8, 9 of the greens if you go out there and you're super long off the tee. Not only that, at the Nicklaus course, to take advantage of some of those risk reward holes, a lot of it comes down to your driving distance, being able to cut off corners. And then at the stadium course, it's always good to have off the tee play, right? It's probably a little bit less important at the stadium course than the other two, but just like birdie or better percentage, I want people that can put themselves into contention to then at the stadium course, we want those good ball strikers. That's been exactly what's correlated to success. Of the top 25 finishers, almost all of them gained on approach at the stadium course, which is, again, the most correlated stat to success on the PGA Tour, but also vast majority of them, at least 65%, were able to gain significantly off the tee. So those tee to green stats around the green also extremely important here. So when we're looking at some of the other key stats, we've got shots gained around the green, actually a little bit more important at the stadium course than it is at other courses. Shots gained putting is always in the modeling, but perhaps just a little bit less important this week. Shots gained on desert golf courses, shots gained at Birdie Fest are metrics that I'm considering, and then of course our comp courses, which we'll hop into right now. All right, our comp courses. At number 1, we've got Accordia Golf Narashino, the home of the Zozo Championship, a track in general where you're going to see a relatively low winning score, but it's all set up by your opportunities. The reason why Data Golf has this as the number 1 correlated course is because it's all about birdie or better percentage, and then your shots gained off the tee and your shots gained approach. It's a ball striker's paradise. It's no surprise that Hideki was able to win there. Somebody like a Keegan Bradley was able to win this year around. When you look at some of the champions at that event, you compare them to the guys that have been champions at the American Express. Well, perhaps there's been a few more shorter hitters that have won at that track. Again, a small sample size for Accordia Golf, right? Only a couple years sample size for the Zozo Championship there. It's still, from the stat perspective, especially at the stadium course, a lot of that lines up, especially from the stats perspective. So if Data Golf has it as number 1, I think we have to consider that, but particularly when we look at some of the ball striking stats, being able to take advantage off the tee, that's important at the Zozo Championship. We know approach play is going to be important at both courses, and if somebody like Hideki can win there, or Keegan Bradley's capable of winning, we know the greens a little bit easier to read, right? We know that they're running pure, a similar sort of surface as what we have at this golf course as well. And some of those weaker putters perhaps can get by a little bit more. So that's why you see that correlation and why it's there at number 1. Number 2, you have Torrey Pines Golf Course, the South Course, where you've had US Opens before, also the main course, quote unquote main course, right, for the Farmers Insurance Open. And really the idea here is that it's all about ball striking, right? Off the tee play coming into play because of a long rough out there, relatively long golf course, way longer than what you're going to get for the stadium course this week. But it emphasizes that approach play, that off the tee play, and putters like a Luke List, right, who's one of the worst putters on all of the PGA Tour, were able to win there. So kind of like a Keegan, right? Kind of like a Hideki, kind of like a few of the winners like a Hudson Swafford, John Rahm you've seen at this event. Let's think about it. Some of the other past champions that have won here that aren't the best putters. Siwoo Kim's not very consistent with the flat stick. Andrew Landry, one of the worst putters that you're going to find. Now, Adam Long's pretty consistent putter, but that's the one outlier out of the last 5 champions. So definitely like a lot of that correlation there, and perhaps just the emphasis on the ball striking. And lastly, we have Congaree Golf Club, which was the home for the Palmetto in the CJ Cup. Garrick Higo was able to win at the Palmetto. We can see now that he's not the best putter on the PGA Tour, a lot better with the off the tee play in the ball striking. And then for the CJ Cup, Rory McIlroy able to go out there and win. Just a lot of players at both of those events, especially towards the top of the leaderboard, that are approach first specialists. And I have the CJ Cup hat on for a reason here. I was at the event, and from the visual perspective, I can tell you that a lot of the shots are the same. You have a lot of contoured greens, tiered greens with a lot of slope to them, but the ball striking is not that difficult, right? The fairway percentage is right about average. Your green and regulation percentage is slightly higher than average at that event too. It's really all about the defense on the greens, which, like I said, they're difficult, but they're difficult for everybody. No one's going out there except for Hudson Swafford, right, who ended up winning last year, having like that ceiling performance with the flat stick. No one was going out there and gaining a bunch of strokes on the greens. And it was kind of the same thing at Congaree, right? A lot of the top end finishers weren't gaining 6-7 strokes to the field on the greens. You saw that at Wailea. You'll see that at Kapalua for the Tournament of Champions. Players going out there and gaining a bunch of strokes. That's why I like these 3 courses as comps, because on the greens, and they're actually kind of tricky at Torrey Pines. They have some pretty tricky greens there. Narashino has quite a few breaking greens too. A lot of people compare them to Augusta. When that happens, when the whole field is struggling in that department, it brings the ball strikers to the top, because they're always going to struggle, right? They're typically the ones having to deal with that even at a relatively simple course on the greens. So that's what we're looking at in terms of comps. If you wanted to look at a few others, look at courses where ball striking is king. You can even look at major championships to try and get this sort of comp out there. Just places where that putting is de-emphasized are what you want to be looking at here. All right, fellas, that is all I've got for the course breakdown. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and comment down below what you think the winning score is going to be. I'll go ahead and take 26 under, but we know it's going to be a birdie fest. Anything between 20 to 30 under par, I think you're on the right track there. Go ahead and let me know your thoughts. And of course, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. We're going to have even more content throughout the week, whether it's for DFS, betting, or of course for prize picks, we'll have you covered. We'll have core picks dropping later on today, value picks dropping, also our weekly DFS live stream. That'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday evening. So check that out. Bring on any questions you have to that live stream. I appreciate all the support here on the channel, on the video. Make sure to comment that winning score. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next time for the core picks video.